Looking into the haze of Venus, experts have found traces of phosphine, a possible indicator of life.
For over 60 years, a secret has been buried deep in the frozen vaults of Moscow. Photos taken by Soviet spacecraft on the surface of Venus, images so disturbing that they were immediately hidden from the world. Now, decades after the collapse of the Soviet Union, these declassified images are finally creeping into daylight, and what they reveal has left NASA scientists completely terrified. Everyone has been wondering why they spent decades and huge resources trying to hide it from everyone, including their own people. But now, we know exactly why. The 1960s were defined by one thing: the race to conquer space. While America set its attention on the moon and the unsettling red plains of Mars, the Soviet Union did the unusual. They chose Venus. But why Venus of all planets? Venus is the brightest planetary body in our night sky after the moon, but it's also the most hostile place you can imagine. Its atmosphere is filled with toxic carbon dioxide and sulfuric acid, 90 times denser than Earth's. The pressure on its surface alone would crush a human being in split seconds. Surface temperatures reach over 900 degrees Fahrenheit, yet between 1961 and 1984, the Soviet Union launched over 30 missions to this hellish world. So why pour enormous resources into exploring a world that will utterly destroy anything that comes near it? The Americans thought the Soviets had lost their minds. Venus might seem like a dead end, but the Soviet Union wasn't known for making careless decisions, especially not when it came to their space program. Something about Venus had captured their attention, something they weren't sharing with the rest of the world. And as we'll see, that thing would change everything we thought we knew about life beyond Earth. It all began for the Soviet Union on February 12, 1961, with the launch of Venera 1. This was barely 4 years after they shocked the world with Sputnik, the first artificial satellite ever. Venera 1 is more or less a failure, losing all contact with Earth just 7 days after launch. It missed Venus by a huge margin. The spacecraft drifted helplessly through the void. Its signal was totally lost, but instead of being discouraged, the Soviets doubled down. Venera 2 launched on November 12, 1965. Another failure. No data transmitted back to Earth as it only flew past Venus. Venera 3 followed just 4 days later, and while it did manage to crash land on Venus, becoming the first human-made object to impact another planet, contact was lost before any usual information could be sent home. By the late 1960s, most countries would have given up. The Soviets had spent millions and years of work, only to watch their spacecraft get destroyed by Venus's hellish environment. But they kept going, mission after mission, failure after failure. Then came June 12, 1967. Venera 4 completely changed everything. Now this wasn't just another flyby mission. Venera 4 was designed to enter Venus's atmosphere and survive long enough to transmit data back to Earth. On October 18, 1967, it did exactly that. For the first time in human history, we were receiving information directly from another planet's atmosphere. The data was terrifying and fascinating in equal measure. Venus's atmosphere was indeed 90 times denser than Earth's with no magnetic field. Surface temperatures exceeded 900 degrees Fahrenheit, with traces of nitrogen and those thick sulfuric acid clouds. Venera 4 transmitted for 93 minutes before the crushing pressure finally silenced it to dust. But those 93 minutes gave scientists their first real glimpse into what would become humanity's greatest mystery. The real breakthrough came on December 15, 1970. Unlike Venera 4, which could only enter Venus's atmosphere, Venera 7 became the first spacecraft to successfully land on another planet and transmit data back to Earth. The engineering behind this achievement was simply extraordinary. Built to withstand pressures up to 18 megapascals and temperatures of 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. However, the landing wasn't as smooth as they had expected. Venera 7 hit the surface at a speed far higher than intended. Its parachute system overwhelmed by the dense atmosphere. The probe tumbled and fell, leaving its antennas misaligned. For 23 minutes, it transmitted weak and invaluable data back to Earth, confirming the crushing atmospheric pressure that would make exploring Venus a dead end for decades to come. But the Soviets weren't giving up without a fight. Venera 8 followed in 1972, lasting over 50 minutes on the surface. This extended survival time allowed for a detailed analysis of Venus's soil composition. The probe detected uranium, thorium, and potassium, suggesting that Venus shared some real geological similarities with Earth. But it also revealed some strange concentrations of elements that didn't match any known terrestrial patterns. These were humanity's first physical contact with an alien world. But even as the Soviets celebrated their achievements publicly, something strange was happening behind the scenes. The data being released to the international scientific community seemed incomplete. In 1975, the Soviet Union achieved what many thought impossible. They captured the first images directly from the surface of another planet. The models of Venera 9 and 10 were equipped with cameras specifically designed to survive Venus's hostile environment and transmit visual data back to Earth. But the images they captured were mind-bending and really terrifying. Venus's surface was covered in sharp, angular rocks stretched toward a horizon hidden by thick, orange-tinted clouds. There were no signs of life, no rivers or oceans, just a barren wasteland that seemed to stretch on forever. The landscape looked scorched, alien, utterly lifeless, like a microwaved orange. Venera 9 transmitted for 53 minutes before surrendering to the heat. Venera 10 lasted 65 minutes. In those brief windows, they sent back not just images but detailed environmental data that painted a picture of a world more hostile than anyone had ever imagined. But the crown jewel of Soviet Venus exploration came in 1982 with Venera 13 and 14. These probes were the most advanced planetary landers ever built, designed to survive Venus's extreme conditions for as long as possible. And of course, they exceeded all expectations. On March 1, 1982, Venera 13 landed on Venus and began transmitting data. It survived for an astonishing 127 minutes, over 2 solid hours. The probe sent back stunning color images showing a landscape bathed in eerie orange and red hues, distorted by the thick atmosphere. But Venera 13 did something even more remarkable. It recorded the sounds from the surface of Venus. This was the first of its kind in human history. The recording captured a haunting, low-frequency rumble, the sounds of Venus's winds sweeping across the barren plains. The atmosphere was so dense that even sounds moved at a sluggish pace. This is where things got really disturbing. While NASA made a habit of releasing almost everything from their missions, flooding the public with data from Apollo, Viking, and Voyager programs, the USSR handled theirs differently. They only released select results like temperature readings and a handful of images, but key information was missing. Many frames from Venera 13 and 14 were absent from the official reports, and this raised some really uncomfortable questions. The famous surface images showed wide-angle shots of rocky terrain under a dull orange haze. But experts noticed that the contrast had been altered. Certain areas were strangely blurred, and entire sections of telemetry data were totally gone. Unlike NASA's open data policy, the USSR simply released just enough to prove their missions had happened, then held everything else back behind a curtain of secrecy. This wasn't just Cold War paranoia. If the data were meaningless, then why hide it? If it was nothing so special, why go to such lengths to suppress it from the public's eye? In 2012, nearly 3 decades after the last Soviet Venus mission, a veteran researcher at Russia's Space Research Institute made a discovery that would rattle the world of science. Dr. Leonid Sanfomalady, who had worked closely on planetary imaging during the height of the Soviet space program, decided to take another look at the images captured by Venera 13 back in 1982, and what he found defied every logical explanation. After reanalyzing the surface photographs using modern digital enhancement techniques, Sanfomality identified 3 distinct anomalies that appeared to show movement and change between sequential frames, despite the lander itself being completely stationary. The first anomaly was what he described as a black, fabric-like object, approximately 60 millimeters in height. In one frame, this object appeared to be wrapped around part of the probe's equipment. In the next image, taken minutes later, the object had completely disappeared without a trace. The second anomaly was even more disturbing, a structure that resembled a scorpion. This form was clearly visible in one frame, casting a distinct shadow in one direction. In a subsequent image, the same object cast its shadow in a completely different direction. This should have been impossible with a fixed light source. The third was a disc-shaped object that seemed to appear and vanish across different images, sometimes visible, sometimes completely absent, with no apparent cause for the changes. Sanfomality didn't claim plainly that these objects were signs of alien life, but his published analysis stated that the shapes exhibited the features of living organisms. His findings were published in a peer-reviewed Russian scientific journal, but the implications were so staggering that most Western scientists immediately pushed back fiercely. NASA and planetary imaging experts argued that the anomalies were nothing so serious, but simply artifacts caused by lens flares, data glitches, or environmental effects on aging Soviet technology. They pointed out that Venus has a thick, toxic atmosphere that could bend the appearance of light, and that the imaging equipment aboard the Venera landers was just not up to the modern standards. It felt like they were doing everything they could to discredit the publication, but some analysts weren't convinced at all. They noted that certain shadows in the images appeared to change direction, which would be difficult to explain with static objects and a stationary lander, even with the light-bending nature of the planet's atmosphere. Others pointed out that some of the forms had visible outlines and textures, suggesting they weren't just errors but possibly physical structures. What made Sanfomality's claims even more intriguing was their timing. His analysis came just after interest about Venus were reignited in the scientific community, particularly around the possibility of life outside Earth. Whether the whole anomalies on the images were biological, mechanical, or something more sinister remained a mystery. But Sanfomality had done more than re-examine old photographs. He had cracked open questions that had been buried for 30 years. What if these images weren't just mere glitches, but a pointer to something even scarier? And why had they remained hidden in Soviet archives for so long? On September 2020, the scientific world was rocked by an announcement that changed everything we thought we knew about Venus. A team of astronomers led by Dr. Jane Greaves at Cardiff University reported something that should have been impossible. A phosphine gas had been detected in Venus's upper atmosphere. On Earth, phosphine is a rare and unstable molecule. It's produced by microbes living in environments where oxygen is really poor, like swamps, marshes, or the digestive systems of animals. Now, while phosphine can be manufactured industrially, in nature it's almost always tied to biological processes. Finding it in Venus's atmosphere was like discovering a smoking gun for extraterrestrial life. The entire scientific community went haywire. Some researchers claimed it was simply an error in the instrument used. Others concluded it could be from some unknown geological processes or overlooked chemical reactions. But the detection was just impossible to ignore, especially when follow-up observations confirmed the finding. Dr. Graves and her team came back with new data from the Atacama Large Millimeter Array in Chile, backed by space-based observations. Their discovery? Phosphine wasn't just present in Venus's atmosphere, it was abundant and stable with time. Even more surprisingly, they detected phosphine not only in the upper atmosphere, but in deeper layers, with concentrations that remained steady across multiple observations. So this stability meant it wasn't a transient event or even measurement error. Something was actively producing phosphine in Venus's atmosphere, something our minds can't imagine yet. As the phosphine discovery made headlines around the world, researchers began digging deeper into historical Venus mission data, and that's when they made the biggest discovery that connected modern science to long-forgotten Soviet secrets. In 2023, a researcher working through declassified Moscow archives stumbled upon a batch of previously unreported photographs from the Venera missions. These images had never appeared in scientific journals, press briefings, or even internal Soviet space program reports. One photograph in particular caught analysts' attention. The image captured by Venera 13 in 1982 showed what appeared to be a low-lying haze close to the Venusian surface. For decades, this had been dismissed as heat distortion or camera interference. But when modern researchers enhanced the image using advanced digital processing and cross-referenced it with archived telemetry data, they discovered something extraordinary. The spacecraft's infrared sensors had recorded an absorption spike at wavelengths that modern spectral analysis now associates with phosphine gas. Now, this was captured decades ago when it was simply dismissed as noise or equipment interference. But with today's understanding of phosphine signatures and gas modeling techniques, the spectral pattern matched closely with what we now recognize as a phosphine detection. The implications were staggering. The Soviets may have detected signs of biological activity on Venus nearly 4 decades before the rest of the world even knew to look for it. And instead of announcing this world-changing discovery, they had deliberately buried it. The photograph itself showed clear signs that it had been tampered with. Scratches obscured key sections, timestamps were missing, and there was no record of any follow-up analysis or investigation. It looked less like a discarded image and more like evidence that had been hidden, and this is where everything took a dark turn. In 2023, researchers found something incredible that would change everything we thought we knew about the story. Deep inside a forgotten storage warehouse in Moscow, they stumbled upon boxes and boxes of undisclosed Soviet photographs from Venus missions. While digging through the Cold War-era space records, hidden images that had been sitting there gathering dust for over 4 decades, the collection came straight from Venera 13 and 14. Which landed on Venus in 1982. Most of the pictures showed exactly what you'd expect: barren landscape, rocks and soils, and that weird orange glow from Venus's toxic atmosphere, all in black and white and very few colors. Taking a closer look, they discovered that some of these images had been deliberately damaged, missing timestamps, photographs with sections scratched out, blurred or cropped out areas where key data should be visible, missing labels and identification tags. Some had weird patterns or geometric shapes that looked nothing like anything we know on Earth. Someone had gone through these systematically, making sure certain details would never see the light of day. When modern analysts ran these damaged images through advanced AI reconstruction software, what they found was simply staggering. The artificial intelligence managed to piece together sections that had been corrupted, and what emerged were structures resembling thread-like patterns, cell-like clusters that resemble cellular structures, and wave-like shapes that couldn't be explained by any known geological activity. Even stranger, there were traces of gas venting from surface cracks. It became obvious that something was actively happening down there. The real bombshell came when researchers fed a seemingly worthless photograph through their AI enhancement. This particular image had been written off as useless because of the surface reflection that made it impossible to see clearly. But as the AI worked its magic and the picture became clearer, something extraordinary appeared in the data. Right there in the foreground was a perfect 6-sided geometric pattern etched into the terrain. Now, at first, you might think this could be some kind of natural formation, but the precision was incredible, too perfect and organized to be a coincidence. The pattern showed up in multiple locations with identical symmetry and spacing that suggested something way more sophisticated than random geological processes. Scientists started debating whether these formations might be biological. Maybe some kind of microbial communities that had adapted to Venus's inhabitable environment. But here's the shocking part. The pattern wasn't just sitting there static. When researchers compared multiple photographs taken just minutes apart, they could see subtle changes in the cluster arrangements. The shifts were tiny but consistent. suggesting that whatever they were looking at was actually active, not some frozen geological feature. This discovery perfectly matched up with archived heat signature data from Venera 13. The spacecraft's sensors had recorded an unusual energy spike at the same location where these six-sided patterns appeared. Modern analysis of this energy signature showed remarkable similarities to phosphine detection markers. For the first time, scientists had visual evidence, chemical data, and time-based observations all pointing towards the same incredible conclusion. There might be living biological processes happening on Venus's surface, and the Soviets had documented it 40 years earlier and buried it right under our noses. The final smoking gun didn't come from scientific analysis, but from history's archive. Hidden among the declassified materials with the secret Venera photographs was an internal Soviet memo from 1983. The document specifically mentioned the photograph containing the six-sided patterns. It recommended keeping the image classified because of terrain features and chemical readings that don't match any known rock formations. A handwritten note suggesting preventing distribution beyond authorized research facilities. Now, this might look like standard scientific procedure to some people, but the security classification and specific language suggested something much more deliberate. This wasn't just a data review language. This was an order to hide evidence that couldn't be easily explained away. The memo proved that Soviet scientists hadn't just accidentally captured potential proof of alien life. They had understood its significance and deliberately chosen to suppress it. For more than 4 decades, the first visual and chemical proof of biological activity beyond Earth had been locked away in a filing cabinet in Moscow. The implications go way beyond just Venus. If microscopic life could survive in such impossible conditions, it meant that life might be far more widespread throughout the universe than anyone had ever imagined. And if evidence of that life had been discovered and buried once, what other insane discoveries might be hidden in government archives worldwide? The response from the scientific community hasn't been excitement or wonder, but fear. For generations, Venus has been dismissed as a cosmic wasteland. The scientific conclusion was absolute. Nothing could survive those insane temperatures, that crushing atmospheric pressure, those sulfuric acid clouds. Entire frameworks and theories about where life could exist were built on the idea that Venus was the yardstick for a hostile environment. Now, this new evidence doesn't just suggest that life can survive in previously impossible conditions. It implies that life might actually flourish in environments that we've been completely writing off as dead zones, maybe deep beneath the thick ice of Alaska or in the methane haze of Titan. But the panic runs much deeper than just being wrong about Venus. The fact that critical evidence was hidden for 4 decades has completely shattered trust in the entire scientific community. If the Soviets could bury discoveries this massive, what other evidence might be locked away in classified government files? How many other impossible findings have been ignored or suppressed throughout history? The damage to scientific credibility and research methods is simply devastating. Another huge concern is whether there's really an active biological ecosystem on Venus, and any future missions risk catastrophic contamination going both ways. Microbes from Earth accidentally brought to Venus could corrupt or wipe out whatever biological systems might be thriving there. Even worse, Venusian microbes could potentially interact with our planet's ecosystem in completely unpredictable ways. The contamination concerns get even more complicated when you consider the timeline. If Soviet spacecraft were already on Venus's surface in the early 1980s, had contamination already happened? Are there Earth microbes that have been evolving in Venus conditions for over 40 years? Or even worse, are there Venusian organisms that hitchhike back on Soviet missions and have been quietly existing on Earth for decades? The biggest terror isn't just that we might have discovered alien life, it's that we discovered it decades ago, completely failed to recognize it, and may have already damaged or destroyed it through our ignorance. The complete implications of the Soviet Venus discoveries will likely stay buried in classified briefings and restricted scientific communities for years to come. But behind the scenes, though, intelligence services are combining through decades of classified space mission records. hunting for other suppressed discoveries. Scientific organizations are quietly reshuffling research priorities and budget allocations. The discovery has sparked a complete reevaluation of everything we believed about life throughout the solar system. While the general public stays mostly clueless about these discoveries, space agencies worldwide are racing to fast-track their Venus exploration programs. NASA's stalled Veritas mission has suddenly found new funding and emergency status. The European Space Agency's Envision probe, originally designed for geological surveys, might now be retrofitted for direct biological signature hunting. India's space program, which had been hinting at Venus interest, could accelerate their Chakrayan-1 orbiter for launch within just a few years. Even private aerospace companies like SpaceX and Rocket Lab are quietly developing concepts for Venus atmospheric vehicles and extreme environment landing craft. But maybe most importantly, Russia views this as a chance to restore scientific credibility and make up for decades of secrecy. This competition isn't just about scientific achievement anymore. It's about who will dominate humanity's first confirmed encounter with extraterrestrial life and what they'll decide to do with that power. The declassified Soviet photographs from Venus have opened a gateway that can never be shut again. We now understand that life can thrive in conditions so brutal that we never even bothered investigating them. The frozen moons orbiting Jupiter and Saturn, the hydrocarbon seas of Titan, even the buried permafrost of Mars. All of these suddenly look like potential biological gold mines. But the most disturbing question isn't where else life might be hiding. It's whether life has been observing us the entire time. If biological systems on Venus are complex enough to form organized patterns and generate detectable chemical signals, they might be sophisticated enough to notice the mechanical explorers we've been sending to their world. For more than 60 years, we assumed we're alone, carefully reaching out into empty darkness. Now we're starting to understand that we may never have been alone at all. The race to return to Venus has started. But this time, we're not just exploring a dead planet. We're potentially establishing contact with life forms that have been observing us from the shadows of our solar system's most nightmarish world. The question remains, are we prepared for what we might discover staring back?